They called her the temporary Duchess. Arthur, Duke of Ravenshaw, married Edith not for love, but for convenience, a placeholder bride while he searched for someone worthy of his title. She knew the truth from their wedding night. She was disposable, a solution until something better came along. But as the months passed in the cold halls of Ravenshaw, something shifted. The house staff whispered. She withdrew. And the Duke, who had never needed anyone, suddenly found himself searching for the one woman he had convinced himself meant nothing. The North Sea crashed against the cliffs below Ravenshaw Hall with a violence that matched the cold settling into Edith's bones. She stood at the window of what was now her bedchamber, watching the grey water meet the greyer sky, and wondered if this view would ever feel like home. It had been 3 hours since the ceremony, 3 hours since she had become the Duchess of Ravenshaw, 3 hours since Arthur, the man who was now her husband, had looked at her with all the warmth one might show a signed contract. The door opened behind her. She did not turn immediately, taking one more moment to steady herself before facing him. Arthur moved through the room with the efficiency of a man conducting business. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair swept back from a face that was handsome in the way that marble statues are handsome. Cold, perfect, untouchable. At 33, he carried himself with the absolute certainty of a man who had never been told no. He had removed his coat. His waistcoat was unbuttoned. He looked at her the way he might look at a ledger that needed reviewing. "You should prepare for bed," he said. His voice was deep, measured, betraying nothing. Edith turned from the window. The wedding dress they had chosen for her was beautiful, ivory silk with delicate lace at the sleeves and neckline. She had felt like an imposter wearing it. She felt like an imposter now. "Your Grace," she began, then stopped. The title felt foreign on her tongue. "Arthur," he corrected, though there was no warmth in the permission. "We are married now. There is no need for such formality in private." She nodded. The maid had left her nightdress laid across the bed, white cotton, modest, appropriate for a bride. She moved toward the dressing screen, her hands already reaching for the buttons at her back. "Allow me." She froze. Arthur had crossed the room, his footsteps silent on the thick carpet. His fingers found the first button, working it free with practiced ease. She felt his breath against the back of her neck, smelled the faint scent of tobacco and sea air that clung to him. One button, then another. Each release felt like a small surrender. "You understand why this marriage was necessary," he said as he worked. It was not a question. "Yes," Edith managed. Her voice sounded small in the large room. "The ducal council required you to marry, to secure the succession, precisely." His fingers continued their methodical work. "You are educated, well-mannered. Your father, despite his financial difficulties, came from a respectable family. You will manage the household efficiently and cause no scandal." The last button came free. The dress loosened around her shoulders. Arthur stepped back. "This arrangement benefits us both," he continued. "You gain a title and security. I gain time to find a suitable duchess while satisfying the council's demands." The words struck her like a physical blow, though she had known them already. Had known them when her father's solicitor first approached her with the Duke's offer. Had known them when she signed the marriage contract. But hearing them spoken aloud on her wedding night, in the room where she would sleep alone for the rest of her life, that was different. She clutched the loosened dress to her chest and turned to face him. "I understand, Your Grace." "Arthur." His jaw tightened. "You will call me Arthur." "I understand, Arthur." Something flickered in his eyes. Approval, perhaps, or merely satisfaction at her compliance. He moved toward the bed, methodical as everything else about him. "Come. We have a duty to fulfill." Edith's hands trembled as she let the dress fall away, as she crossed to the bed in her thin chemise. The sheets were cold. Arthur's hands were colder. He was not cruel. He was not rough. He was simply efficient. As though this too was merely another task to be completed, another item to check off his list. When it was finished, he rose without a word. He dressed with the same efficiency he had shown in undressing her, buttoning his waistcoat with steady fingers. "The household staff will look to you for direction," he said, adjusting his cuffs. "Mrs. Holloway, the housekeeper, will provide you with the daily schedules and accounts." If you have questions, you may direct them to her or to myself. I expect the household to run smoothly." "Of course," Edith whispered. He paused at the door, his hand on the latch. Then, without looking back, "Good night, Edith. Good night, Arthur." The door closed. His footsteps faded down the corridor. She heard another door open and close. His chambers, she realized. Separate rooms. Of course they would have separate rooms. Edith lay back against the pillows and stared up at the canopy above the bed. Dark blue velvet, heavy and oppressive. Outside, the sea continued its assault on the cliffs. The wind howled around the corners of the great house, making it feel even more isolated than it was. She was a duchess now. She lived in a grand estate with servants and fine clothes and security her father could never have provided. She should be grateful. She knew she should be grateful, but as she lay there in the enormous bed, listening to the lonely sounds of Ravenshaw Hall settling into the night, all she could feel was the weight of being chosen for convenience, a solution. A placeholder, temporary. She pulled the covers up to her chin, though they provided no real warmth, and closed her eyes against the tears that wanted to come. Tears were useless. Tears would change nothing. She had made her choice, or rather, circumstances had made it for her, and now she must live with it. The temporary duchess. That was what she was. What she would remain until Arthur found someone better. Someone worthy of being permanent. The thought followed her into fitful sleep, accompanied by the endless, merciless sound of waves breaking against stone. 3 months passed like water through cupped hands, present but impossible to hold. Edith learned the rhythms of Ravenshaw Hall, the way one learns to breathe in thin air. With effort at first, then with resigned necessity. She woke before dawn, when the first pale light turned the sea from black to grey. She dressed with the help of a quiet maid named Mary, who never asked questions and never offered opinions. She descended to the breakfast room, where she ate alone. Arthur was always gone by then. He took his breakfast, standing at the window of his study, looking out over the cliffs while reviewing correspondence. She had seen him once by accident, when she passed by the open door. He had been holding a cup of coffee in one hand and a letter in the other, his profile sharp against the morning light. He had not noticed her watching. She did not linger to be noticed. Her days became a careful catalogue of tasks. She met with Mrs. Holloway each morning to review the household accounts. She inspected the linen closets and the silver service. She supervised the kitchen staff and ensured the fireplaces were properly maintained. She tended the winter greenhouse, where delicate plants fought for survival against the bitter coastal winds. She made herself useful. She made herself necessary. She made herself as unobtrusive as a shadow. Arthur spoke to her perhaps 3 times a week, always in that same measured tone he might use with a competent clerk. "Have the provisions arrived from the village?" "Yes, Your Grace. I have reviewed the inventory. The accounts for the tenant farmers. Have you examined them? I have prepared a summary for your review. It is on your desk." Once, just once, he had looked at her with something that might have been surprise. It was late afternoon, and she had been working in the small study adjacent to the library, her head bent over a ledger. She had not heard him enter. "What are you doing?" he had asked. She had looked up, startled, preparing detailed reports on the tenant farms. The existing records were incomplete. "I thought a comprehensive overview might be useful for planning next season's improvements." He had stepped closer, taking the papers from her hands. His fingers had brushed hers. An accident, meaningless. He had studied her work in silence, his dark eyes moving across the neat columns and careful annotations. "This is thorough," he had said finally. "More thorough than what my steward provides." "I spent time with my father reviewing his clients' accounts," she had explained. "Before his difficulties, he handled complex legal matters. I learned to organize information clearly." Arthur had handed the papers back to her. "Continue with this. It is valuable work." It was the closest he had come to praise. She had held those words carefully, turning them over in her mind like a child with a small treasure. Valuable work. Not you are valuable, but the work. Always the work. That evening, she had allowed herself a small smile as she descended for dinner. Perhaps she could carve out a place here after all. Perhaps usefulness could become something like belonging. The smile died on her lips as she passed by the kitchen corridor. "They say he is still looking," one of the footmen was murmuring to a housemaid. "The Duke, he attends every social event in London, every country house party. He is searching for a proper duchess." The maid giggled softly. "Poor Lady Edith. Everyone knows she is just the temporary one, the placeholder duchess. As soon as he finds a lady of suitable rank and beauty, she will be set aside." "Hush," an older voice cut in. "Mrs. Holloway, that is enough gossip. Back to your duties." Edith pressed herself against the wall, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain they would hear it. Her hands had gone cold. Her breath came in shallow gasps. She had known. Of course she had known. Arthur had told her as much on their wedding night. But hearing it spoken aloud by the servants, hearing herself referred to as the placeholder duchess with such casual certainty, it was like having a wound she had been pretending did not exist, suddenly torn open. She did not go down to dinner that night. She sent word that she had a headache and requested a tray in her room. She sat by her window, looking out at the dark sea, and whispered to herself the truth she had been avoiding. "You are easy to leave behind. You have always been easy to leave behind." Her father had left her in a way when his gambling debts consumed him. Her mother had died when Edith was 12, leaving her to manage a household falling into ruin. And now Arthur had married her with every intention of leaving her too, of replacing her with someone better, someone permanent. She made a decision then, sitting alone in the darkness with only the sound of the waves for company. She would not wait for him to discard her. She would not invest hope in a man who saw her as a convenient solution. She would perform her duties. She would manage his household with excellence, but she would give him nothing of herself, nothing that could be hurt when he finally found the woman he truly wanted. That night, she stopped expecting anything from Arthur, Duke of Ravenshaw, and in stopping, something inside her went quiet. The next morning, she did not hum softly while tending the greenhouse plants. She did not pause to watch the sunrise over the water. She spoke to the servants with cool efficiency and to Arthur with perfect formality. "Your Grace," she said when they passed in the corridor, dropping into a brief curtsy. He had frowned slightly. "I thought we agreed you would call me Arthur. In private, perhaps, Your Grace, but we are rarely in private." It was true. They existed in the same house but moved through it like ghosts who happened to share the same haunting grounds. He in his sphere of business and estate management, she in hers of household administration and quiet invisibility. She became very good at being invisible, but Arthur, though he did not realize it yet, was beginning to notice the absence of what had never quite been there. The small, soft presence of a woman who had, for a brief moment, made Ravenshaw Hall feel slightly less like a fortress and slightly more like a home. He simply did not know yet what he was losing, or that by the time he understood, it might already be too late. The change in Edith was not dramatic. It was the kind of shift that happens slowly, like the tide retreating from shore, so gradual that one only notices when the beach is suddenly bare. Mrs. Holloway noticed first. The Duchess no longer asked about the servants' families. She did not inquire after the cook's ailing mother or compliment the footman on his improved silver polishing. She reviewed accounts with precision but without warmth. She gave orders clearly but never with a smile. "She is withdrawing," the housekeeper confided to her husband one evening, like a flower closing up before frost. Mary, the lady's maid, noticed that her mistress no longer hummed while dressing. The Duchess had possessed a soft, pretty voice, nothing trained or showy, but pleasant to hear. Now there was only silence. The gardener noticed that Lady Edith visited the greenhouse less frequently, and when she did, she moved through the space with mechanical efficiency rather than gentle care. But it was Arthur who should have noticed. Arthur, who passed her in corridors and sat across from her at dinner. Arthur, who shared a home with her but had never truly looked at her, until she was no longer there to see. It began with small things. He descended for breakfast one morning and realized he had not seen her on the stairs at her usual hour. She had always been there, a quiet presence moving through the morning light. He had never acknowledged her, had sometimes looked right through her, but she had been there. Now she was not. He found himself pausing at the library door that afternoon, expecting to see her reading in the window seat where she often sat. The seat was empty. The light fell on vacant cushions. That evening he entered the small drawing room, where she sometimes did needlework, and found it dark. The fire unlit. No sign she had been there at all. "Where is the Duchess?" he asked Mrs. Holloway. "In her private sitting room, Your Grace. She has been spending more time there of late." He did not ask why. He was the Duke of Ravenshaw. He did not concern himself with the comings and goings of his household, but he noticed. 3 days after he first registered her absence, Arthur found Edith in the greenhouse. It was raining, a cold, penetrating rain that turned the world grey and miserable. She was kneeling on the stone floor, her dress pressed against her legs, her hands working in the soil of a terracotta pot. She was trying to save a violet that was dying. The plant was small, its leaves browning at the edges, its blooms long since fallen. He watched her fingers move through the soil, gentle but determined, as though sheer will could bring the thing back to life. She looked exhausted. There were shadows beneath her eyes that he had not noticed before, or perhaps he had simply never looked closely enough to see them. "Edith," he said. She startled, her hand jerking back from the pot. Soil scattered across the floor. She rose quickly, brushing her hands against her apron, and dropped into a curtsy. "Your Grace, I did not hear you enter." The formality grated against something in his chest. He stepped closer, glass crunching beneath his boots. A pane had cracked in the storm, he realized. "Is there a problem with the greenhouse?" he asked, because he did not know how else to begin. "No, Your Grace, everything is in order." "Then why are you here in the rain on your knees, looking as though you have not slept properly in days?" Something flickered across her face, surprise perhaps, that he had noticed. Then it was gone, replaced by that careful, neutral expression she had perfected. "I'm tending to the plants," she said simply. "This violet was struggling. I thought I might save it." "And can you?" She looked down at the dying plant. Her voice, when she spoke, was very quiet. "I do not know. Sometimes things are too far gone to be saved. Sometimes they were never meant to survive in this climate to begin with." He had the distinct impression she was no longer talking about the violet. Arthur moved closer, until he could see the soil beneath her fingernails, the dampness of her dress where she had knelt too long on wet stone. Up close, the exhaustion was more pronounced. She looked fragile in a way that disturbed him. "Are you unwell?" he asked, surprising himself with the directness of the question. "No, Your Grace, I am quite well." "You look tired." "I am managing the household efficiently," she replied, her voice taking on a harder edge. "The accounts are current. The staff is well supervised. The estate runs smoothly. If my appearance does not meet your standards, I apologize, but my work remains satisfactory." The words were professional, appropriate, and completely wrong. "That is not what I asked," he said. She met his eyes then, really met them, and he saw something he had never seen in her before. Not defiance exactly, not anger, but a kind of weary resignation that made him feel oddly guilty, though he could not say why. "What would you like me to say, Your Grace? That I sleep well in this house? That I feel content and valued? That I wake each morning eager to fulfill my duties as your temporary Duchess?" The last two words hung in the air between them like an accusation. "Temporary," he repeated slowly. "Where did you hear that term? Does it matter?" She turned away from him, back to the dying violet. "It is accurate, is it not? You said as much yourself on our wedding night. I am a convenient solution, a placeholder until you find someone suitable." I do not recall using those exact words, perhaps not those exact words, but the meaning was clear. She picked up a small trowel, her movements sharp, agitated. "You need not concern yourself with my feelings, Arthur. I understand the arrangement. I have always understood it. Then why do you seem so angry?" "I am not angry." She did not look at him. "I am simply tired of pretending this is something it is not." "And what is it not?" She was silent for a long moment. The rain drummed against the greenhouse roof. Finally, she set down the trowel and turned to face him. "A home," she said quietly. "This is not a home. It is a house where I perform duties efficiently while waiting to be replaced. That is all it has ever been, all it will ever be." The words struck him harder than they should have. He opened his mouth to respond, to say something, but no words came. Edith moved past him toward the greenhouse door. "If you will excuse me, I have correspondence to review." He watched her go, her spine straight despite the exhaustion, her footsteps steady despite the tremor he had heard in her voice. That night, Arthur sat at the head of the long dining table and stared at the empty chair where Edith usually sat. She had requested a tray in her rooms again. The third time this week. The servants moved around him with careful silence. The food was excellent as always. The wine was the finest from his cellars. And for the first time since he could remember, Arthur, Duke of Ravenshaw, ate dinner in his magnificent hall and felt utterly, inexplicably alone. He did not like the feeling. He liked even less that he had no idea what to do about it. The realization that something was genuinely wrong came to Arthur slowly, like dawn breaking over a winter sea. Edith missed dinner again. And again. 4 nights in a row she requested trays in her rooms, claiming fatigue or a headache, or simply that she was not hungry. Mrs. Holloway brought the trays up and brought them back down, largely untouched. "Your Grace?" the housekeeper ventured one evening, her hands folded carefully in front of her apron. "Perhaps you might speak with the Duchess. She is not eating properly. She looks quite pale." Arthur had frowned. "Is she ill? Should I send for the physician?" "Mrs. Holloway had hesitated, choosing her words with care. "I do not believe it is an illness of the body, Your Grace." He had dismissed her then, irritated by the cryptic response. But the words stayed with him. The next morning, he made a decision. He would go to her. He would determine what was wrong and fix it, the way he fixed problems with the estate or issues with the tenant farms. This was simply another matter requiring his attention. He climbed the stairs to her chambers after breakfast, a journey he had made only once before, on their wedding night. The corridor felt unfamiliar, despite being in his own home. He realized with some discomfort that he had never visited her private rooms, had never thought to. The door to her sitting room stood slightly ajar, firelight spilled into the dim hallway. He knocked, a brief, firm sound. "Enter," came her voice, soft and weary. He pushed the door open and stopped. Edith sat on the floor before the fireplace, wrapped in a shawl that looked too large for her frame. Her hair was down, falling in loose waves past her shoulders. She looked younger like this, and far more vulnerable than he had ever seen her. Her feet were bare, tucked beneath her skirts. She had been staring into the flames, and when she turned to see who had entered, her eyes were distant, as though she were looking at him from somewhere very far away. "Your Grace," she said, making a movement to rise. "Stay," he said quickly, more sharply than he intended. "Please, stay as you are." She settled back, pulling the shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Is something wrong with the household?" "No." He closed the door behind him, suddenly aware that this was deeply improper. A husband visiting his wife's chambers should not feel like trespassing, and yet somehow it did. "I came to see if you were well. I am well. You have missed several dinners. I have been tired. Mrs. Holloway says you are not eating. Mrs. Holloway worries too much." Arthur moved closer, studying her in the firelight. The shadows beneath her eyes were more pronounced than they had been in the greenhouse. Her cheekbones seemed sharper. There was a fragility to her that had not been there 3 months ago, when she had first arrived at Ravenshaw Hall. "Are you in pain?" he asked. "No." "Do you have a fever?" "No." "Should I send for the physician?" "No." The monosyllabic answers frustrated him. He was not accustomed to problems he could not solve through direct action. "Then, what is wrong, Edith? Tell me plainly." She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze returning to the fire. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I do not feel as though I belong anywhere," she said. "Not in this house, not in this life, not even to myself." The words settled over the room like ash. Arthur lowered himself into the chair nearest her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "What do you mean?" She drew her knees up, wrapping her arms around them in a gesture that was almost childlike. "I feel like a guest," she said. "A guest in my own life. I wake each morning and go through the motions of being your Duchess. I manage your household. I speak with your servants. I tend your gardens. But none of it feels real. None of it feels like mine." "It is yours," he said, though even as he spoke he knew the words were hollow. You are the Duchess of Ravenshaw, am I? She turned to look at him, and in her eyes was a depth of sadness that startled him. Or am I simply keeping the position warm until the real Duchess arrives? He had no answer to that. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire. I thought I could do this, Edith continued, her voice growing quieter still. I thought I could be practical about it. Accept the arrangement for what it was. Be grateful for the security and the title. But I cannot seem to make myself feel grateful for being chosen because no one else wanted me. For being useful but not valued. For being present but not seen. I see you, Arthur said, though he was not certain it was true. She smiled then, a sad, knowing smile that made something twist painfully in his chest. No, Arthur. You see a well-run household. You see organized accounts and supervised servants. You see efficiency, but you do not see me. He wanted to argue, wanted to insist she was wrong, but the words would not come because somewhere deep inside, he knew she was right. Without thinking, he reached out and adjusted the shawl where it had slipped from her shoulder. His fingers brushed against her skin, cool, too cool. She shivered, and he found himself moving closer, pulling the fabric more securely around her. The gesture was small, insignificant perhaps, but it was the first time he had touched her with something resembling tenderness. You are cold, he said. I am always cold in this house. It was not a complaint, simply a statement of fact. But it made him aware suddenly of how isolated Ravenshaw Hall was, how the wind came off the sea with nothing to break its force, how the stone walls held the chill even when the fires burned bright, how lonely it must be for someone who had no reason to think herself welcome. I waited for you at dinner, he said finally. The words came out awkwardly, unpracticed. These past 4 nights I waited. She looked up at him, surprise evident in her expression. Why? Because, he faltered, uncertain how to explain something he did not fully understand himself, because the table seemed too large without you there. Something shifted in her face. Not hope, exactly, not joy, but perhaps the smallest crack in the wall she had built around herself. I did not think you would notice, she whispered. I noticed. They stayed like that for a moment, him kneeling beside her chair, her wrapped in the oversized shawl, the fire burning low between them. Arthur found himself noticing details he had missed before. The way the firelight caught in her hair, turning it amber and gold. The delicate shape of her wrist where it emerged from the shawl. The way she held herself, as though afraid to take up too much space. When he finally rose to leave, he paused at the door. Tomorrow, he said. Will you come to dinner tomorrow? She did not answer immediately. Then, softly, yes, if you wish it. I wish it. He left before she could see how the words had cost him, before she could see that he was beginning to realize he had made a terrible miscalculation. He had thought he was using her, thought she was a convenient solution to an inconvenient problem. But alone in his own chambers, Arthur touched the place on his hand where her skin had been cool beneath his fingers, and wondered when, exactly, the inconvenience had become something he did not want to lose. The thought terrified him more than he cared to admit. Winter deepened its hold on Ravenshaw. Snow fell in brutal sheets, and the sea turned black with rage. Edith came to dinner now, but a careful distance remained. She was present, but not there. One afternoon, Arthur found her in the servants' corridor, helping to unload heavy crates of supplies. Her sleeves were rolled to her elbows, her hair coming loose, a smudge of dust across her cheek. What are you doing? She looked up, startled. The supplies arrived. I am organizing them. That is not work for the Duchess of Ravenshaw. She set down the crate with a heavy thud. Then tell me, Your Grace, what exactly is work for the Duchess of Ravenshaw? Managing the household. Not carrying loads like a scullery maid. I am managing. Why should I not be useful? Because you are my wife. She stepped closer, meeting his eyes with full directness. Then tell me, Arthur, what is my place here? What role am I meant to fill? He opened his mouth and found no answer. Am I meant to sit in the drawing room doing needlework? Her voice was low but intense. Am I meant to smile prettily and say nothing? Am I meant to exist decoratively until you find someone suitable to replace me? That is not... What is my place? She repeated, each word deliberate. I have tried to make myself necessary through work. But you object to that, so tell me plainly what you want from me." Silence hung heavy between them. "I do not want you injuring yourself," he managed. "That is what you do not want." "What do you want?" He had no answer. Edith turned away. "I will leave the crates for the footman, forgive me." She left him standing there, feeling as though he had failed a test he had not known he was taking. That evening, a letter arrived. "My cousins in Bath," Edith explained at dinner. "They have invited me to visit for a few weeks." Arthur's hand tightened on his wineglass. "You wish to go?" "They are family, the only family I have left. And what will you tell them about your marriage? What would you have me tell them?" He had no answer to that either. Later he followed her to the drawing room. "When do they expect you?" She turned, surprised. "I have not replied. I was not certain it would be appropriate." "Of course it is. They are your family. But you are my husband. I would not wish to leave if needed here. Your presence is always required." He caught himself. "The household depends upon your management." "Yes, the household." She smiled without warmth. "It will survive without me. I could invite them here instead." "You do not like guests," Edith said gently. "And they would feel uncomfortable. They would be happier hosting me." "And would you be happier there?" "I would be happier anywhere I feel wanted, rather than merely useful." The words struck like a physical blow. "I will accept their invitation," she said, "if you have no objection. And if I do object," she searched his face, "then I will stay. But if you ask me to stay, let it be for a reason beyond household accounts." What other reason would there be? She smiled that sad, knowing smile. Exactly. She left him alone. Through the window, snow fell thick and fast. He imagined the house without her, the corridors empty, the dining table vast and silent. The thought was unbearable. But he had no words to make her stay. He was the Duke of Ravenshaw, built on logic and emotional distance, and now that distance felt like a prison. 3 days later, the carriage waited. Edith descended the stairs in deep blue, a warm cloak over her shoulders. The staff gathered to see her off, Mrs. Holloway with damp eyes, Mary clutching a handkerchief. "Your Grace," Edith said, curtsying. "Thank you for permitting this. You need no permission." She moved toward the door. "Edith." She stopped. He wanted to say something, anything. But no words came. "Safe travels." "Thank you, Your Grace." Cold air rushed in. Edith walked into the grey morning. Arthur watched her climb into the carriage, watched her settle without looking back. The door closed. The carriage rolled forward. He stood in the doorway of Ravenshaw Hall and watched his wife leave, watched the carriage grow smaller, watched it disappear beyond the trees. Behind him, Mrs. Holloway directed the staff. Everything would continue as always, except something essential had been taken from him. The snow fell harder. He stepped inside and closed the door. The house had never felt so empty. And the worst part was knowing he had let her go, had pushed her away with his inability to say what she had become to him. The silence was deafening. For the first time in his carefully ordered life, Arthur, Duke of Ravenshaw, did not know what to do. If you're invested in this story, hit subscribe and comment below. Does Arthur deserve a second chance? The first day without Edith, Arthur threw himself into work. He reviewed estate accounts, met with tenants, rode through frozen fields. He kept moving, refused to acknowledge the hollow feeling in his chest. By evening, exhaustion should have brought sleep. Instead, he lay awake, listening to the house settle around him. It was too quiet. The second day was worse. He descended for breakfast and found the table set for one. The room felt colder, emptier. He tried to work in the library and found himself staring at the window seat where Edith used to read. The cushions still held the slight depression where she had sat. That afternoon he walked past the greenhouse. Through the frosted glass, he saw the violet she had been trying to save. Dead now. Brown leaves scattered across the soil. No one had thought to care for it. By the third day, Arthur stopped pretending. The house felt cavernous, every room echoing with absence. He wandered into her private sitting room. The space still smelled of her, jasmine and vanilla, faint but unmistakable. Her shawl draped over the chair. An embroidery hoop sat waiting, needle still threaded. A book rested on the windowsill. Arthur picked up the perfume bottle from her dressing table. He uncorked it, breathed deep, and felt something crack open inside his chest. This was not the absence of a household manager. This was Edith, and he missed her with an intensity that frightened him. He sat in her chair, still holding the bottle, and forced himself to face the truth. He had not married a placeholder. He had married a woman who sang while tending plants, who asked after servants' families, who had tried desperately to find a place in his cold life, and he had given her nothing. He had treated her like a temporary solution, and now she was gone. What have I done? That night, he paced until dawn, then made a decision. "Prepare the carriage," he told his valet. "We are going to Bath." The journey took most of the day. Arthur sat rigid, rehearsing what he would say, but every phrase sounded hollow. They arrived as evening fell. The address led to a modest townhouse, nothing like Ravenshaw's grandeur, but warm, with light spilling from windows and laughter inside. Arthur stood on the doorstep, aware of what he was about to interrupt. Edith happy, surrounded by family who wanted her. He knocked anyway. A middle-aged woman answered, eyes widening. "Your Grace," she curtsied. "We were not expecting—" "I apologize for arriving unannounced. Is my wife available? Of course, please come in." She led him to a small sitting room, cozy, lived-in, books stacked everywhere. He heard voices from deeper in the house, laughter, Edith's voice among them, lighter than he had ever heard it. Then footsteps. The door opened. Edith appeared, face flushed, hair less formal, dress simple. She looked younger, happier, like someone who belonged. "Arthur." Her eyes were wide. "What are you doing here?" "I came to see you." "Is something wrong at Ravenshaw?" "No, everything is in order." He paused. "But for me, nothing is in order." She stepped closer, closing the door. "I do not understand. The house felt empty because you were not there. Not your work. You, Edith." She stared, guarded. "You came all this way to tell me that?" "I came because I could not stay there another day without you, because I have been a fool, because I do not want you to be temporary." Her breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I miss you." "Not the Duchess, not the household manager. You. The way you hum when you tend plants, the way you organize books, the way you listen as though what I say actually matters. Arthur, Ravenshaw is not home without you. I waited for you at dinner every night. I went to your sitting room and breathed in your perfume because it was the only way to feel less alone." Tears welled in her eyes. "You never said, 'I know.'" His voice was rough. "But I am saying it now. I am asking now." "Asking what?" He stepped closer. "Will you come back? Not because the household needs you, not because it is your duty, but because I need you, because I want you there, because I cannot imagine my life without you." She searched his face. "For how long? Until you find someone better?" "There is no one better. There never was. I was too blind to see what was in front of me." "And what was in front of you?" "You. My wife. The woman I should have cherished from the first day." A tear slipped down her cheek. "You hurt me, Arthur, I know, I am so sorry. You made me feel worthless, I know. And I will spend every day proving you are anything but, if you will let me." She studied him with careful eyes. "Why should I believe you?" "Because I came here. Because I stood in your empty rooms and realized what I had lost. Because for the first time in my life, I do not have all the answers, and the only thing I know for certain is that I cannot lose you." She closed her eyes, more tears falling. "I do not want to go back to being invisible. You will never be invisible to me again, I swear it." When she opened her eyes, something had shifted. "You promise?" "I promise." She took a breath. "Then ask me properly." "What?" She stepped closer. "Ask me properly." Arthur understood. He took her hand, held it carefully. "Edith, will you come home with me? Not as a convenience, not as a placeholder, but as my wife, my partner, the woman I choose, now and always." She looked at their joined hands, then his face. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will come home." Relief flooded through him. He pulled her close, wrapped his arms around her, held her as though she might disappear. She melted into him, face against his chest, hands clutching his coat. "I missed you," he said into her hair. "God help me, Edith, I missed you so much." "I missed you too," she admitted, even though I did not want to. They stood holding each other in the warm sitting room while the world continued outside. When they pulled apart, Arthur touched her face, wiping away tears. "We should tell your cousins. Leave tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" She smiled slightly. "So soon? I have been without you for 4 days. That is 4 days too many." She laughed softly, and the sound made his chest expand with warmth. For the first time since she had left, Arthur felt like he could breathe. He had found her, and this time he would not let her go. The carriage departed Bath under a sky heavy with unfallen snow. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with things unspoken. Arthur and Edith sat across from each other at first, maintaining formal distance, but everything had changed. The carriage hit a rough patch. Edith lurched forward, and Arthur's hands shot out, catching her by the arms. His grip was firm, steadying. Their eyes met, held. "I have you," he said quietly. His hands remained on her arms longer than necessary. When he released her, the absence of his touch felt like a loss. Arthur cleared his throat. "Your cousins were kind. They were. They asked many questions about you. What did you tell them? The truth. That you were a good man who did not know how to show what he felt. And now? Now I think you are learning." The carriage swayed. Arthur moved to sit beside her. "May I?" Edith nodded, pulse quickening. He settled next to her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. Close enough that when the carriage turned, his shoulder pressed against hers. "I did not sleep well while you were gone," he said. "I kept thinking about that first night. Our wedding night." Edith tensed. "That was not—" "I know." He turned to face her. "I treated you like a transaction. I have regretted it every day since. Arthur, let me finish. Please. When we return to Ravenshaw, things will be different. You will not wonder if you belong. Because you do." She felt tears threatening. "I want to believe that. Then believe this." He reached for her hand, laced his fingers through hers. "I waited 33 years to feel anything real. And then you walked into my life and I was too much of a coward to acknowledge what was happening. What was happening? I was falling for you. Every time you organized accounts, every time you spoke kindly to the servants, every time you sat reading, the light catching in your hair." He brought her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles. "I was falling and I did not know it until you were gone." Edith's breath caught. "You cannot just say things like that." "Why not?" "Because it makes me want to forgive you too easily." "Then do not forgive me easily." He kissed her palm. "Make me earn it. I will spend as long as it takes." The carriage bumped again. Edith swayed toward him, and Arthur wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. She fit there perfectly. "Is this all right?" he asked. "Yes," she whispered. They rode in silence, but it was warm, connected. Arthur's thumb traced small circles on her waist. Edith's hand rested on his chest, feeling his heartbeat. "Tell me something I do not know about you," he said. "I used to write poetry, before my father's troubles." She paused. "I stopped because there was no time. It seemed frivolous." "It is not frivolous." He shifted to see her face. "Will you write again? At Ravenshaw? Do you want me to?" "I want you to do whatever makes you happy. Poetry, tending the greenhouse, reorganizing my library, singing while you work. Whatever brings you joy." She looked up at him. "Who are you and what have you done with the Duke of Ravenshaw?" He smiled, transforming his face. "He is learning that being a duke means nothing if he cannot make his duchess happy." "You are making progress, Your Grace." "Arthur," he corrected. "When we are alone, I am simply Arthur." "Arthur," she repeated softly. "Say it again." "Arthur." He leaned closer, forehead nearly touching hers. "I love hearing you say my name like that." Without distance, their faces were inches apart. Edith could feel his breath on her lips, warm and unsteady. "Arthur," she whispered. "Edith." His hand cupped her face, thumb stroking her cheekbone. "May I kiss you? Not as a duty, but because I want to. Because I've been thinking about it since the moment you opened that door in Bath. Yes, the kiss was nothing like their wedding night. That had been cold, meaningless. This was heat and hunger and months of suppressed feeling. His lips moved against hers with tenderness that made her ache. She clutched his coat, pulling him closer, and he responded by deepening the kiss. The carriage swayed, throwing them together. Arthur's arm tightened around her waist. His other hand tangled in her hair, pins scattering. Edith made a small sound and he swallowed it, kissing her harder. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. Arthur pressed his forehead to hers. "That is how I should have kissed you the first time." Edith laughed breathlessly. "Perhaps it is better that you did not." "And why is that?" She traced his jaw with her fingertips. "Because I might have married you for the wrong reasons. And what would the right reasons be?" "This. The way you look at me now. The way you hold me like I matter. You do matter." He caught her hand, kissed her fingers. "You matter more than anything." They kissed again, slower but no less intense. Arthur pulled her closer, and she went willingly, arms wrapping around his neck. The world outside ceased to exist. When they arrived at Ravenshaw, neither wanted to separate. Arthur helped Edith down, but kept her hand in his. He kept her close as they entered the hall where staff had gathered. "Mrs. Holloway smiled widely. "Welcome home, Your Grace." "It is good to be home," Edith said, and meant it. Arthur kept her hand in his as they moved through the house. The servants noticed. Whispers followed them, warm, approving whispers. That night they dined together, sitting close enough that their hands touched on the table. Afterward, Arthur walked her to her chambers. At the door, neither wanted to part. "Edith," he said, voice low, "I know we are taking things slowly. I know I need to earn your trust, but I want you to know my door is never locked. If you ever want company, you are always welcome." She smiled. "Thank you." "And Arthur?" "Yes, your door may not be locked, but perhaps you should try knocking on mine instead." His eyes darkened with understanding. "Are you certain?" She reached up, pulled his face down, and kissed him. When she pulled back, she whispered, "Come to me tonight." Not as a duke fulfilling a duty, but as my husband who missed me. "I will be there," he promised. The door closed between them, but both knew it would not stay closed for long. For the first time since their wedding night, they would come together by choice, by desire, by love that had been there all along, waiting to be acknowledged. And this time everything would be different. Edith sat before her mirror, heart racing as Mary finished unpinning her hair. The maid worked in silence, sensing something had shifted in the air of Ravenshaw Hall. "Will that be all, Your Grace?" "Yes, thank you, Mary." The door closed softly. Edith remained at the mirror, watching her reflection. Her hair fell in loose waves past her shoulders. She wore a nightgown of ivory silk, far finer than the plain cotton from her wedding night. She looked different now, or perhaps she simply felt different. A soft knock at the door made her breath catch. "Come in." Arthur entered, closing the door behind him. He had changed from his travel clothes into a simple white shirt and dark trousers. His hair was slightly disheveled, as though he had run his hands through it repeatedly. He looked nervous, uncertain, human. Their eyes met across the room. "You came," she said softly. "You invited me." He took a step closer. "But if you have changed your mind—" "I have not changed my mind." He crossed the room slowly, as though afraid sudden movement might break the spell between them. When he reached her, he knelt beside her chair so their eyes were level. "I want tonight to be different from before," he said, his voice rough. "I want you to know that this is not duty, not obligation. This is me choosing you, wanting you." Edith reached out, touched his face. Her fingers trembled slightly. "I know. If anything I do makes you uncomfortable, you need only say so. We can stop at any time." "Arthur," she smiled gently, "I trust you." Something shifted in his expression. Relief, desire, tenderness all at once. He stood, offering his hand. She took it, letting him help her to her feet. They stood facing each other beside the bed. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting golden light across the room. Outside, wind howled around the corners of Ravenshaw, but inside, everything was warm. Arthur lifted his hand, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered, tracing the curve of her jaw. "You are so beautiful," he whispered. "How did I not see it before? You were not looking. I am looking now." He leaned down, kissing her softly. It was different from the passionate kisses in the carriage. This was slower, deeper, weighted with promise. His hands moved to her waist, pulling her closer until their bodies pressed together. Edith's hands found the buttons of his shirt. She worked them free, one by one, her fingers brushing against his chest. She felt him shudder at her touch, heard his breath hitch. The shirt fell away. She placed her palms flat against his chest, feeling the warmth of his skin, the steady thunder of his heartbeat. He was solid, real, and he was hers. Arthur's hands moved to her shoulders, fingers slipping beneath the thin straps of her nightgown. He paused, looking into her eyes. "May I?" "Yes." The silk slid down slowly, pooling at her feet. For a moment they simply looked at each other. No barriers, no pretense, nothing but truth laid bare. "You are exquisite," Arthur breathed. He kissed her again, and this time there was urgency mixed with tenderness. His hands explored, tracing the curve of her spine, the dip of her waist, the flare of her hips, as though memorizing every inch of her by touch. Edith's own hands grew bolder. She traced the muscles of his shoulders, his arms, his back. Every touch drew sounds from him, quiet groans, sharp intakes of breath that made heat pool low in her belly. They moved to the bed. Arthur laid her down gently, following her onto the soft mattress. His weight pressed her into the sheets, but it felt right. Safe. Wanted. "Tell me what you feel," he murmured against her neck, his lips trailing fire down her throat. "I feel—" She gasped as his mouth found the hollow of her collarbone. "I feel alive. I feel wanted. You are wanted." His hands continued their exploration, learning what made her gasp, what made her arch into his touch. "God help me, Edith. I want you more than I have ever wanted anything." "Then take me. Not as you did before, but as you do now." Arthur lifted his head, looking into her eyes. "As your husband who loves you." The word hung between them, unspoken until now. "Yes," she whispered, "as the man I love." Something in his expression broke open. He kissed her deeply, pouring everything he felt into that kiss. Apology, devotion, desire, love. What followed was nothing like their wedding night. That had been cold, mechanical, empty. This was fire and tenderness intertwined. This was Arthur's hands trembling as he touched her. This was Edith's breathless whispers of his name. This was the slow, careful joining of two people who finally understood what they meant to each other. Arthur moved with exquisite care, watching her face, learning what brought her pleasure. When she gasped, he repeated the motion. When she clutched his shoulders, pulling him closer, he obliged. When she whispered, "Please," he gave her everything. Edith discovered her own capacity for desire, discovered that she could make him lose control with a touch, a kiss, a whispered word, discovered that vulnerability could be strength when shared with someone who cherished it. They moved together, finding rhythm, building heat. The world narrowed to just this, skin against skin, breath mingling, hearts racing in tandem. Edith felt herself climbing toward something bright and shattering, felt Arthur there with her, both of them suspended on the edge. When release came, it came for both of them together, a breaking open, a coming home, a perfect recognition of belonging. Afterward, they lay tangled in the sheets, breathing hard. Arthur pulled her close, tucking her against his chest. His hand stroked her hair, gentle and reverent. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. "More than all right." She pressed a kiss to his chest. That was everything it should have been the first time. He tipped her chin up so he could see her face. "I am sorry I denied us this for so long. Sorry I was too blind to see what I had. We found our way here eventually, because you were brave enough to leave. Brave enough to demand better. And you were brave enough to come after me." He kissed her forehead. "I will always come after you, always choose you, for the rest of my life, Edith. You are my choice." She smiled against his skin. "And you are mine." They lay in comfortable silence, limbs entwined, listening to the fire settle and the wind outside. Edith felt her eyes growing heavy, felt the pull of sleep. "Stay," she murmured. "Do not go back to your chambers." Arthur tightened his arms around her. "I am not going anywhere. This is where I belong now." She fell asleep with her head on his chest, his heartbeat a steady lullaby beneath her ear, and Arthur lay awake a while longer, staring at the canopy above, marveling at the woman in his arms, at how close he had come to losing her, at how everything that mattered had almost slipped through his fingers, because he had been too proud, too cold, too afraid to admit he needed someone. Never again, he promised silently. Never again would he take her for granted. Never again would he let a day pass without showing her she was cherished. He pressed a kiss to her hair and closed his eyes, finally at peace. Ravenshaw Hall had always been a fortress, but tonight, for the first time, it felt like a home. Morning light filtered through the curtains, soft and golden. Edith woke slowly, awareness returning in gentle waves. Warmth surrounded her, an arm draped across her waist, the steady rhythm of breathing against her hair. Arthur. She turned carefully, not wanting to wake him. In sleep, his face had lost its usual severity. The lines around his mouth had softened. He looked younger, peaceful. His dark hair fell across his forehead, and she resisted the urge to brush it back. As though sensing her gaze, his eyes opened. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. "Good morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Good morning." He pulled her closer, burying his face in her neck. "Did you sleep well? Better than I have in months." She ran her fingers through his hair. "You? Best sleep of my life." They lay there as the room grew brighter, neither wanting to break the spell of morning intimacy. Finally, Arthur lifted his head, propping himself on one elbow to look at her properly. "I should return to my chambers," he said, "before the servants gossip too much." "Let them gossip." She smiled. "They have been waiting for this." "Have they?" "Mrs. Holloway has been giving me meaningful looks for weeks. I think the entire staff knew how you felt before you did." Arthur laughed, a real, genuine laugh that made her heart swell. "They are far too observant. They care about you. About us." He traced her cheekbone with his thumb. "I care about us too, more than I ever thought possible." They rose eventually, helping each other dress with an intimacy that felt natural. Arthur buttoned the back of her morning dress, pressing kisses to her shoulder as he worked. Edith tied his cravat, standing on her toes to reach, laughing when he pulled her close and kissed her breathless. The day unfolded differently than any before. They took breakfast together, sitting close, hands touching on the table. Arthur asked her opinion on estate matters, actually listening to her suggestions. Edith found herself relaxing into the role she had always wanted. Partner, not placeholder. They walked the grounds together despite the cold. Arthur kept her hand tucked in his arm, pointing out improvements he wanted to make come spring. She told him about ideas she had for the greenhouse, for expanding the herb garden, for creating a small library for the servants. "You have thought about this," he observed. "I have had a lot of time to think, and now you can act on those thoughts. Whatever you want to do, Edith, you have my full support." That afternoon, another letter arrived from Bath. Edith read it in the drawing room while Arthur worked through correspondence nearby. She smiled at something her cousin had written. "Good news?" Arthur asked, looking up. "They are asking if I might visit again in the spring, for a garden party. And will you?" She set down the letter. "Would you mind?" Arthur rose from his desk, crossed to where she sat, and knelt beside her chair. "I would mind being without you, but I would never keep you from your family. You could come with me." His eyebrows rose. "To Bath? To a garden party? Why not? They are my family. Should they not know my husband?" She saw the moment the words landed. "My husband," said with affection, with pride, with permanence. "I would like that," he said quietly. "Very much. Then we will go together." He took her hand, suddenly serious. "Edith, there is something I need to say." "What is it?" He stood, pulling her to her feet. "Last night was—" He paused, searching for words. "Last night was the first time I truly understood what I had been missing, what I almost lost." "Arthur, please let me finish." He cupped her face in his hands. "When I married you, I told myself you were temporary, a convenient solution while I found someone more suitable. But the truth is, there is no one more suitable. There never was. You are not a placeholder, Edith. You never were." Tears welled in her eyes. "Then what am I?" He took a breath, and when he spoke, his voice was steady with conviction. You are my wife, my partner, the woman who makes this cold house feel like home, the woman who taught me that I could feel something beyond duty and obligation. She searched his face, seeing the truth written there. I do not want you to ever doubt your place here again, he continued. I do not want you to wonder if I am still looking for someone else, because I am not. I never will be. You are not temporary, Edith, you are forever. He dropped to one knee, still holding her hand. What are you doing? She whispered. What I should have done from the beginning. He looked up at her, eyes bright with emotion. I am asking you, properly this time, to be mine. Not as a convenient arrangement, not as a placeholder, but as the woman I love, the woman I choose every day for the rest of my life. Arthur, be mine, Edith, truly mine. Not because a contract says so, but because your heart says so. Be mine, and I will spend every day proving I am worthy of you. The tears spilled over. I have always been yours, she said softly. Even when you did not see it. Even when I tried to protect myself from hoping. I have been yours since the day I walked into Ravenshaw. He stood, pulling her into his arms. And I have been yours since the moment you asked me what your place was, and I realized I had no answer, because your place was always meant to be beside me, as my equal, as my love. She looked up at him through tears. I need to hear you say it, properly. Say what? That you love me. He smiled, wiping her tears with his thumbs. I love you, Edith. I love your kindness and your strength. I love the way you hum when you work and the way you organize books by size. I love that you challenged me when I needed it most. I love you, and I will love you until my last breath. She pulled his face down to hers. I love you too. I love your terrible awkwardness with emotions and your unexpected tenderness. I love that you came after me. I love that you are trying so hard to be the man I need. I love you, Arthur. Their kiss was deep and sweet, sealed with tears and laughter and relief. When they broke apart, Arthur kept his forehead pressed to hers. No more doubts, he asked. No more doubts. No more wondering if you belong. I know where I belong. Right here. With you. He kissed her again, then pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her as though he would never let go. Mrs. Holloway found them like that minutes later, standing in the drawing room, holding each other as though they were the only two people in the world. She smiled, dabbed at her eyes with her apron, and quietly closed the door. That evening they stood together at the window overlooking the cliffs. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The sea was calmer than usual, almost peaceful. Arthur wrapped his arms around Edith from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. What are you thinking? That this view looks different now. How so? Before, it felt lonely, like I was watching something beautiful, but could not be part of it. She leaned back against him. Now it feels like home. He kissed the side of her neck. You are my home, Edith. Wherever you are, that is where I belong. She turned in his arms, looking up at him. Promise me something, anything. Promise that when things get difficult, when we argue or frustrate each other, you will remember this moment. Remember that you chose me. I promise. He touched her face. And you promise the same. I promise. They stood together as darkness fell, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely way, who had almost lost everything before realizing what they had. And as the first stars appeared in the sky above Ravenshaw, Arthur whispered once more against her hair, You are mine, and I am yours. Always. Always, she echoed. It was not an ending. It was a beginning. The real beginning of their marriage, the start of a life built not on convenience or duty, but on love freely given and gratefully received. And in the great hall of Ravenshaw, where cold stone had stood for centuries, warmth finally took root and grew. Spring arrived at Ravenshaw Hall like a quiet promise kept. The snow melted from the cliffs, revealing green shoots pushing through dark earth. The sea, though still wild, seemed less angry. And inside the great stone house, something fundamental had changed. Edith woke each morning to Arthur's arms around her. They had abandoned the pretense of separate chambers weeks ago. His room had become theirs, filled now with her books, her embroidery, the jasmine perfume he loved. The space that had once been cold and austere now held warmth. She descended to breakfast and found him waiting, no longer standing alone at the window but sitting at the table, saving the chair beside him for her. They talked over tea about the day ahead, his meetings with tenants, her plans for the expanded greenhouse. The staff noticed the transformation. The Duke smiled now. Actually smiled. He held doors for his Duchess, touched her hand in passing, looked at her with such obvious devotion that even the most jaded footman found himself sighing. Mrs. Holloway confided to her husband that she had never seen His Grace so happy. And Lady Edith, she positively glowed. Edith had indeed transformed Ravenshaw, not just the house but its very spirit. She created a small lending library in the servants' hall, filling it with books from Arthur's collection. She organized better wages for the tenant farmers, working with Arthur to review contracts fairly. She opened the greenhouse to the village children once a week, teaching them about plants and growth. Arthur watched her work with quiet pride. His Duchess, no, his wife, had turned his fortress into something resembling a community, and he loved her more each day for it. One afternoon, he found her in the greenhouse, kneeling among the spring plantings. She was humming softly, that unconscious sound of contentment he had missed so desperately during her absence. "What are you planting?" he asked, coming to kneel beside her. "Violets." She smiled at him. To replace the one that died. That one was beyond saving. Everything deserves a second chance. She touched his face. Even dying violets, even cold dukes. He caught her hand, kissed her palm. "I was never cold, merely frozen." "You thawed me. How poetic, Your Grace." "I learned from the best." He gestured to the small journal beside her. "Are those your poems?" She blushed. "Just a few verses. Nothing remarkable." "May I read them?" She hesitated, then handed him the journal. Arthur read slowly, his expression softening with each line. They were simple poems, about gardens, about the sea, about finding light in dark places, and one, near the end, about a man who learned to love. "These are beautiful," he said quietly. "You should share them. They are just for me." "Then I am honored you let me see them." He set the journal down carefully. "Will you write one about us, perhaps if you behave?" He pulled her close, dirt and all, and kissed her thoroughly. "How is that for behavior?" "Terrible." She laughed against his mouth. "But I love you anyway." They spent the afternoon working side by side in the greenhouse, comfortable in the silence between them. This, Edith thought, was what she had always wanted. Not grand gestures or pretty words, but this quiet companionship, this sense of partnership. That evening they walked the cliffs together, his coat wrapped around her shoulders. The wind was strong, but not bitter. Spring wind, carrying promise instead of threat. "Do you remember the first time we stood here?" Arthur asked. She nodded. "I felt like the loneliest person in England. And now I feel like the luckiest." He pulled her close, sheltering her from the wind. "I am the lucky one. You could have refused to come back, could have stayed in Bath where you were happy. I am happier here with you, even when I am difficult, especially then." She smiled up at him. "Someone needs to keep the great Duke of Ravenshaw humble. You do that admirably." They stood together watching the sun sink toward the horizon. The light caught the waves, turning them gold and amber. Edith leaned back against Arthur's chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong. "I was thinking," she said carefully, "about the future." "What about it?" She took his hand, placed it on her stomach. "About our family." Arthur went very still. "Are you—" "Not yet. But perhaps soon, if you want— if I want." He turned her to face him, his eyes bright with emotion. "Edith, there is nothing I want more than a family with you. Children with your kindness and intelligence. A house filled with laughter instead of silence." She blinked back tears. "I was afraid you might not be ready." "I was not ready for you, and yet you are the best thing that ever happened to me." He kissed her forehead. "Whatever comes, we will face it together." "Together," she echoed. As darkness fell, they returned to the house. Lights glowed in every window, warm and welcoming. Smoke curled from the chimneys. The great doors stood open, as though the house itself was embracing them home. Inside, the staff moved about their evening duties. The cook was preparing dinner. The maids were turning down beds. The footmen were lighting candles. It was all ordinary, all routine, but it felt extraordinary. "This is home," Edith said softly. Arthur looked around, at the hall he had inherited, the house that had been in his family for generations. It had always been impressive, grand, important, but it had never been home until she arrived. "Yes," he agreed, "this is home." They climbed the stairs together, his arm around her waist, her head on his shoulder. In their chambers, the fire was already lit, the bed turned down. Mary had left Edith's nightgown laid out, and Arthur's valet had prepared his things. But they were in no hurry. They sat together by the fire, Edith in Arthur's lap, talking quietly about nothing and everything. Plans for the summer, ideas for the estate, dreams for the future. When they finally moved to bed, it was with the easy intimacy of two people who had learned to trust each other completely. Arthur pulled Edith close, tucking her against his chest where she fit perfectly. "I love you," he murmured into her hair. "I love you too." Outside, the sea continued its eternal conversation with the cliffs. The wind sang around the corners of Ravenshaw Hall. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. And inside, in a bed that had once known only cold duty, two people slept, wrapped in each other's arms, warm and safe, and utterly, completely home. Ravenshaw Hall had stood for centuries, stone and mortar, tradition and pride. It had been a fortress, a symbol, a seat of power, but it had never truly lived until Arthur learned to love, and Edith learned she was worthy of being loved. Now, at last, the great house had what it needed most, a heart. And that heart beat steady and true, in rhythm with two others, promising that whatever came next, they would face it together. Always together. Forever. Sometimes the greatest love stories are not about finding someone perfect, but about two imperfect people learning to see each other truly. Arthur built walls of duty and distance to protect himself from feeling. Edith learned to expect so little that she almost disappeared into her own life. But when she found the courage to leave, and he found the courage to follow, they discovered something neither expected. That home is not a place, but a person. That being chosen is not about being perfect, but about being seen, valued, and loved for exactly who you are. In the end, Ravenshaw Hall did not change them. They changed it. They filled its cold stone corridors with warmth, its silence with laughter, its emptiness with purpose. And in doing so, they built something far more enduring than any fortress. They built a life worth living, together.